All right, so for the module today is going to be attackers and their tools on module 13. The main idea is to figure out who's attacking the network, who are the threats and the vulnerabilities that could be trying to access your data or property, servers, computers, tablets, etc. So a threat is usually defined as a potential danger to an asset, such as the data or the network itself. A vulnerability is going to be some weakness in a system or its design that could be exploited by that threat. An attack surface is usually the total sum of all the vulnerabilities in a given system that are accessible by an attacker. So the attack surface describes different points where an attacker could get into a system and where they could get in and out of data. The exploit is going to be the mechanism that's used to leverage that vulnerability to compromise an asset. Exploits can either be remote or local. A remote exploit is one of those that works over the network without any access prior to the target system. In a local exploit, the threat actor has some type of user or administrative access to the end system, and it does not necessarily mean that the attacker has physical access to the end system. On a risk, this is the likelihood that a potential threat or a particular threat will exploit a particular vulnerability of an asset and result in an undesirable consequence. So these are all good terminologies to know. They'll be on the quiz and or on the exam of this particular week. For risk management, it's just going to be, again, a couple more ways to define risk and risk management strategy. So risk acceptance is going to be the cost of risk management options outweighing the cost of the risk itself if the risk is accepted and no action is taken. Risk avoidance means that we're going to avoid any exposure to risk by eliminating the activity, thus resulting in losing any benefits from that activity. Risk reduction is just going to reduce our exposure to the risk. It's going to be most commonly used risk mitigation strategy, requires careful evaluation, cost of loss, mitigation, and the benefits that are gained through that operation or activity. And then risk transfer is just going to do some or all of the risk is transferred to a willing third party, such as an insurance company. All right, so other key terms this week or in this module are going to be countermeasures. These are going to be actions taken to protect those assets by mitigating a threat or reducing risk. Impact is going to be the potential damage to the organization that's caused by the threat itself. Note, a local exploit requires inside network access, such as a user with an account on the network. It does not require that an account on the network to exploit the network's vulnerability. So what is a hacker versus a threat actor? The term hacker is usually used to describe a threat actor. A hacker has various meanings of those that follow. So a clever programmer that's capable of developing new programs and making code changes to an existing program to make them more efficient. A network professional that uses sophisticated programming skills to ensure that networks are not vulnerable to the attack. And an individual who runs programs to prevent and corrupt data on servers. So the word hacker can be used in both a good light and a bad light, and that's why we have several different levels of hackers, and those are the main three that you see down below. You have a white hat and you have a black hat, and then you have somebody that's kind of in between those two as a gray hat. So white hat hackers, these are your ethical hackers who use their programming skills for the good, ethical, and legal purposes. Whereas, say, for example, a black hat is going to be unethical criminals who violate computer and network security for their own personal gain. And then you got that combination gray hat they commit crimes and unethical things, but usually not for personal gain or to cause any real damage. The term threat actor is used when referring to individuals or groups that could be classified as a gray or black hat. So how did this evolution of threat actors begin? Well, hacking started in the 1960s with the phone phreaking, which is, if you're not familiar with it, they basically use different audio frequencies to manipulate the phone systems. And this was typically the payphone systems of the day. In the early 1990s, threat actors realized that by mimicking a tone using a whistle, and you could design and build your own whistle, They could exploit phone switches to make free long-distance phone calls. In the 1980s, threat actors wrote war dialing programs, which dialed into each telephone number in a given area in search of computers, bulletin board systems, and fax machines. When a number was found, a password cracking program was used to gain access. And if you've ever watched the movie War Games, this is kind of what they're describing initially as in that particular movie. He was going through and scanning through an entire phone book directory and seeing if he could find a bunch of computers out there. So types of different threat actors. You have script kiddie, which is basically they describe it here as a teenager or inexperienced threat actors running existing scripts, tools, and exploits to cause harm, but typically not for profit. A lot of times these are people that just download Kali Linux and now they have all these scripted tools available to them. A vulnerability broker is typically a gray hat hacker who attempts to discover exploits and then report them to vendors for prizes or rewards. You also have bug searchers out that do that same thing, only this is from the hacking side of things. A hacktivist is usually a gray hat who's rally and protest against different political and social ideas. We have cyber criminals. These are typically black hat hackers who are either self-employed or working for a large cybercrime organization. And then you have state-sponsored hackers, and these are threat actors who steal government secrets, gather intelligence, and sabotage networks of foreign governments, terrorist groups, or corporations. So, cyber criminals. These are your threat actors who are motivated to make money using any means necessary. As times, cyber criminals can work independently or they can be financed and sponsored through criminal organizations. They steal billions of dollars from consumers and businesses every year. They operate underground and buy and sell personal information as well as intellectual property they steal. They target small businesses and consumers as well as large enterprises and industries. So this is going to get more into your malware that ends up being ransomware. Cybersecurity tasks, these are going to target the home users, small to medium businesses, as well as very large and private organizations. Hence, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility that all users must practice to make sure the internet and the networks are safer and more secure. Organizations must take action and protect their assets. They must develop and practice cybersecurity tests, and those mentioned in the figure here. So we see, getting a trustworthy IT vendor and then working through their security software updates, regular penetration tests, etc. So what are some cyber threat indicators? And these are typically what they refer to as the indicators of compromise, or the IOCs. These IOCs are the evidence that an attack has occurred and that each attack has unique identifiable attributes. For example, these features can be identifying malware files, IP addresses of servers that are used in the attacks, file names, characteristic changes that are made to the end system software, as many, many more. Help cybersecurity professionals and personnel identify what happened during the attack and develop attacks against that. And so you can see over on the right-hand side, they had a malware file that came in there. There's the SHAs and the MD5 sums of that particular file. These were the list of DNS requests that came through during this particular link, and then the IP addresses of the servers that those resolved to. You can also have indicators of attack, so IOAs. In IOAs, you focus more on the motivation and the strategies behind the attack and the attackers to gain access to the assets. Help generate a proactive security approach that can be reused in multiple contexts and multiple attacks, therefore defending a strategy to prevent future attacks. So threat sharing and building cybersecurity awareness. Governments are now obviously pushing hard for cybersecurity. In the US, we have the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, or CISA. This is leading the effort to automate and share cybersecurity information with public and private organizations at no cost. We also have a system with them that's called the AIS, or the Automated Indicator Sharing, which enables the sharing of attack indicators between the US government and the private sector as soon as those threats are verified. In the European agency, we have the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, or ENISA. They deliver advice and solutions for cybersecurity challenges in the EU member states. The CISA and the National Cybersecurity Alliance have an annual campaign every October, which is called National Security Awareness Month, and it's used to raise awareness about cybersecurity. All right, so the theme for 2019 was Own It, Secure It, Protect It, and this was for the National Cybersecurity Month. Obviously, the next one will start here next week. So security topics provided throughout the campaign is social media safety, updating privacy settings, awareness of the device app, etc., protecting your Wi-Fi and your consumer data. So what are the tools that these threat actors will use? So to exploit a vulnerability, a threat actor must use a technique or a tool. Over the years, different attack tools have become more sophisticated and highly automated, and that's basically with the help of things like Kali. These new tools require less technical knowledge to actually implement them. And so in the figure that you see over here on the right-hand side, you can see the time data relationship, and this is going to be within your module. The evolution of security tools. Ethical hacking kind of involves many different tools to test and network and end devices. To validate the security of the network and its tools, many penetration testing tools have been developed, and many of these tools can be used by threat actors for exploitation. Threat actors can be created various hacking tools themselves, as well as cybersecurity personnel must know how to use those tools in order to perform network penetration tests. So most of these tools are going to be Unix or Linux based, and therefore a security professional should have a strong Unix and Linux background. Much why I make sure that everybody that comes to this course should have taken the Linux courses that we teach here at Fort Hays. So the evolution of security tools, these are just a list of different tools that are out there and then some of their examples. So for example, password crackers, these are used to crack or recover passwords. The most popular is going to be John the Ripper or Oathcrack. This one is more of your Windows-based passwords. John the Ripper will do a wide variety of passwords. You have wireless hacking tools. These are used to intentionally hack wireless networks and detect security vulnerabilities. Aircrack and Kismet are extremely popular for that. Network scanning and hacking tools. This is much like what we've used so far, where we have Nmap, and we can see the hosts available with TCP ports and UDP ports. We have packet crafting tools. These are going to allow us to probe and test the firewall's robustness for HPing and SCAPI. SCAPI is going to allow you to basically build packets within Python, and then you can send those out. HPing is like an advanced ping utility that you have even within Windows or Linux. Packet sniffers themselves, these are used to capture and analyze packets, for example, Wireshark that most of you are familiar with. You also have TCP dump, which is the similar on the Linux side on the command line, so that you can dump those packets out and later read those or go through those with Wireshark. Rootkit detectors, these are typically going to check a directory and file integrity to make sure they can detect rootkits. You have AIDE and NetFilter, and then you have some fuzzers. And fuzzers are used to attempt to discover a computer system's security vulnerabilities. So they're going to go through and test all the different ports and activities, etc. These are going to be like Skipfish and Wapiti. Other tools, forensic tools. Main ones here are going to be SleuthKit and Helix. These are used to kind of sniff out traces of existence on a system. You also have debuggers, for example, GDB and WinDebug. Hacking operating systems, as I've mentioned a couple times now, you have Kali Linux as well as SE Linux. There's several other distros out there that are based around cybersecurity. Other encryption tools, you have Veracrypt and CipherShed. These are going to help you encode and decode different algorithm schemes. You also have exploitation tools, for example, Metasploit. Metasploit is kind of an open source resource of database of different exploits. They now have a paid for system that you can use to to get some updates, as well as different attacks and different vectors, that kind of thing. And then you have the big dog Core Impact. Core Impact it's a very expensive tool. However, it is much of a point and click and say, I want this. If this system has this exploit, you click it, you hit go, and it goes and does the exploit. It's extremely beneficial and thorough. It is just extremely expensive. Vulnerability scanners, you can have things like Nipper and Secure PSI. These are going to go through and scan the system to identify ports. Obviously, other tools that we've talked about so far can do this same thing. All right, so different categories of attacks. There's a couple different ones based on what the threat actor wants to do. Then they use different tools to carry out these different attacks. So for example, an eavesdropping attack, this is mostly going to be when threat actors capture and listen to network traffic. It's also called sniffing or snooping. We have data modification attack. This is where we're going to capture the enterprise traffic and alter the data in these packets without the knowledge of the sender or receiver. This is commonly like your man-in-the-middle style of attack. Your IP addressing spoofing attack. This is where the threat actor is going to construct an IP packet that appears to originate from a valid address inside the corporate network. You can see all these other attacks that we talked about. So password-based attacks, this is where a threat gets the credentials for a valid user account. Denial of service attack, this is where we're going to sit there and try to block traffic, which results in the loss of network access and resources. A man-in-the-middle attack is when we position ourselves between the source and the destination, collecting data and therefore allowing us to do these other style of attacks. Compromised key is going to be when they obtain some kind of secret key that can then gain access to a secure communication without that sender or receiver knowing. Sniffer attack is going to be an application or device that can read, monitor, or capture network exchanges and read packets. If those packets are not encrypted, the sniffer has full view of that data that's inside of there. And this simple sniffer attack is no different than, say, Wireshark. All right, so to summarize this particular module, the idea is to understand network security, understand the full terms such as threat, vulnerability, attack surface, exploit, risk, understand what risk management is and the process of preventing and protecting those measures and the assets that they contain. You also have 4 common ways to manage risk and risk of acceptance, risk avoidance, risk reduction, and risk transfer. A hacker can be used to describe a threat actor. Remember that there's different levels of, quote, hackers. You have white hat hackers who are ethical hackers that are using their skill for good, ethical, and legal purposes. We have gray hats, which are the individuals who commit crimes and do unethical things, but they're not doing it for their own personal gain. You also have black hat hackers who are criminals who violate everything with the computer and network security, their personal gain for malicious reasons, usually attacking networks. Many of these attacks can be prevented by sharing information, and therefore you have IOCs or indicators of compromise. And there's a bunch of different organizations around the world that allow this sharing of information. Attack tools have become more sophisticated, and they're very much automated now. Many of these tools are all going to be based on Linux or Unix and are useful to the cybersecurity professional. There's a whole list of tools that they could be familiar with, and so be familiar with those tools, as well as the categories of attacks. Understand what type of attack and when you would use what type of attack. And we're going to dive into that more here in the next few modules. And that closes out attackers and their tools.